Shall I start, Rajesh? Or a few minutes more?
A second, not a minute, a few seconds. Just
Okay.
let me check the YouTube is okay. Yeah, fine now. Please start.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining us in this new session of the In Conversation series. This is the fourth session that we have in this series, and today we have the pleasure to share with you the conversation among Judith Sutz and Smita Srinivas. I'm very happy to have you here sharing your work, your history, and all the contribution that you have made to the literature. I also would like to thank to Jorge Katz, Andrew Cummins, and Carlota Perez that she is not here because she has another commitment that couldn't be. She couldn't be here right now, so she let us. She sent us some questions for the panel after the conversation. So I would like to thank all of them and Rajesh for doing this wonderful work at these meetings. Today, as I said, we are going to share the conversation between Judith and Smita. I would like to introduce them, and then I will let Smita to conduct the interview. So let me share my screen with some of the Judith's work, so you can just know a little more about her if you already don't know very much. I doubt it, because she has made a lot of very relevant contribution to our community. So let me pass for some of the most of the important topics of her life. She is a researcher. Judith is a researcher in the field of science, technology, society, and development. She has specialized in the study of development and underdevelopment based on the interaction between science, technology, and society. She also researched on the problems associated with the production and social use of knowledge, promoting interdisciplinarity in the fields of social science. She has made a very significant contribution to understanding the innovation process in the Global South. Her theoretical and empirical research elaborates the concepts of university for development and learning divide that I think are very, very important for our community, our field of works. Her proposal to think innovation policies as social policies also constitute one of her main contributions that point at integrating the international literature on innovation with development literature. She has a background on the electrical engineering, so she is very interdisciplinary by herself, because after being an engineer, she turned to social science. Being an engineer, she is a social scientist, which is more important than turning. She's both of things, because she knows the problems of technology from inside, and then she elaborates on the impact that this technology has in our society. She also have a very political commitment, and she was exiled in Venezuela for a while, and there, I think, there you met Carlota, then you could tell us with more detail. She works with very close with Rodrigo Arocena, who is her husband, and I think most of the works that she published, or a lot of the work she published, are co-authors with him. And I think it's a very interesting history of companioning and working together in elaborating thinking for social science. So this is very briefly the very interesting life of Judith that I hope then we have more details of it. And I would like to introduce and thanks to Smita Srinivas for sharing this afternoon, this morning with us. Smita conducts research and advice at micro level and political aspect of the economic development, industrial strategy, firm level priority, technological innovation and industrial policy. She has a research agenda based on theoretical and practical and empirical agenda. She was awarded with the John Robinson Prize in 2015 for her book Market Menagerie, Health and Development in Late Industrial States. She have co-authored some papers with Judith, so I think it was a great idea that she interview her. So it's one of the few examples of a truly global South cooperation between India and Latin America. So I will stop here, and Smita, the floor is yours. Thank you very much again.
Thank you really to the organizers who got us all together. And where Veronica ended, which is really to say, it's a pleasure at two levels. One, of course, is that we're linking continents in this very nice new way across continents, a chance to actually collaborate in this way. But also to remind ourselves that, in our collaborations across time, there really is both a lapse over time where you see your own work developing and you recognize all your influences, but also you see that certain themes keep coming back. And when I was listening to Veronica discuss and lay out Judith's work, I was really reminded of how important it had been when I first met her. She and I first met at the time of the Millennium Development Goals and the Millennium Development Project, which now seems like the land of the dinosaurs. It was a long time ago. But we are in a moment where we're looking at the new Sustainable Development Goals, and some of the same discussions about development, about inequality, about how you think about knowledge, how do you frame the questions of which actors are involved, who controls this process, and what is innovation in this process. These are issues that have been long on the table. And it's not just Judith who has made enormous contributions. Many of the panelists who are here with us today have also done the same. And so it's a particularly wonderful opportunity to reflect, I think, especially for younger scholars, to reflect on how, while some things change, some things don't change. These topics come back over and over again. We go into greater depth. We recognize people who've contributed, and we ask ourselves, what is it that we have done that moves this slightly or more significantly forward? And I think one of the challenges for us in this conversation, and I want to get into this in a little bit more discussion with Judith, is whether or not we see development in the same ways as when Judith herself began her career. And I just want to situate our meeting because I think it will be instructive. One of the reasons I think that Judith has been so effective as an interdisciplinary scholar is not only because she has tasted multiple disciplines herself, and therefore she's constantly looking for ways in which to have conversations. But one of my abiding happy memories of scholarship is when I first met her. During the MDGs, we ended up during the tea break in some of the discussions for the Science Technology Innovation Task Force meeting, where I was, of course, younger and so was Judith. And we started having a discussion about whether we thought that some of the ways in which technology, innovation, and firm behavior was reflected was in fact correct. Did people actually think of these processes in the way that we had considered our own journeys in labs? So while Judith was an engineer, I had come out of physics and mathematics. And so both of us, I won't say it was love at first sight, but it was pretty close. We immediately got a coffee, we sat down, we had a lot of discussion, and we started asking whether the descriptions that we thought were truer to our experience in the labs were reflected in the conversations of economists or other development scholars. And it was out of that meeting that we actually wrote the paper, Developing Countries and Innovation, Searching for a New Analytical Approach. And for those of you who've read it, it will be no surprise that it was one of the times where we actively tried to frame the question around problem solving. Innovation as a problem solving process where we were trying to differentiate countries, but also trying to differentiate cognitive processes within countries. And this sort of gets into my first question to Judith. I know you said you didn't want me to say this was an honor to speak with you, but I'm going to use that dreadful word and say it's really an honor to have a chance to do this. And I must thank the organizers for inviting me. So my first question really has to do with this point where a lot of young scholars see themselves. They think about their discipline, they think about the way they are trained in that discipline, they feel an allegiance to a discipline, and often they can't really frame a problem very easily within that context. So I want you to tell us a little bit about how you began as an engineer, what allegiances you retained with engineering, how you made this little crossover into the social sciences. I want to hear about this.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much, all of you. I feel a little bit, I don't know how to say it. Let's say it, I feel a little bit ashamed because, well, okay, but let's not lose our time with my shyness. Let me tell you something. You know, Smita said tea break. For us Latin Americans is coffee break. In the same, Smita is going to talk about the West, and we Latin Americans are going to talk about the North. So we are the global South, but we have some kind of difference. But one thing I want to remember of our first talk with Smita. For me, it was something that I could have never have imagined. When I described what I saw in my reality, Smita told me, but this is exactly the same in India. And she started telling me examples from India, people solving problems in the Indian reality, firms and other places. And I recognize, and she recognized the same pattern. And this pattern is what we ended up calling the capacity to innovate in scarcity conditions. And nothing since 2003 or 4, I think we started working. And after 2 years, sharing emails, refining our concept until we get to this paper in 2008. Nothing since then has have weakened our convictions that this is very important. And this is very important now, more than ever, because climate change call for frugality, call for innovation and solving problems in scarcity conditions. The abundance that has depleted our Earth planet should be changed. And we in the Global South, I am absolutely sure that know much better than in the North how to do it. So this is just to a little point. So yes, I was an engineer. The reason why I was an engineer, I was very young in Uruguay, and they used to say that women are not so brilliant and not so intelligent, and I was against that, and this was a very, very bad reason to study engineering. So I was able to finish the career in Venezuela. Dictatorship in Uruguay, and then I went to Argentina. In Argentina, I worked in the first computer factory in Latin America, Fate Electrónica in Buenos Aires. But then came dictatorship in Argentina. Then we were received so wonderfully in Venezuela, where I finished my career. But they have something that was called Centro de Estudios del Desarrollo, Center for Developing Studies in Caracas. It was something that was made mainly out of Chilean ministers of the socialist government of Allende. I have professors, ministers of economy of Allende. I think about that and I think, what a privilege. And well, I wanted to understand more what goes on. And I was much better a social scientist as I was an engineer. Let's be honest. So yes, this, social sciences are so important to understand everything. I don't understand why economists are so looking forward to be considered physicists. I don't understand. It's much more complicated to be a social scientist than to be a mathematician. I study mathematics. You, Smita, you studied physics. You tell me, isn't that right? Isn't much more complicated, really? It's much more an intellectual challenge to deeply understand what's going on in society. It's much more interdisciplinary. It's much more really complex. And well, I was very happy being able to combine, and I tried to combine. And so I started studying informatics and third world development. And I worked a lot of years in that direction. I'm not sure if I answer correctly your question, but and let me tell you something that's important. It's not easy to start mathematics and physics at 30 or 40, but it's perfectly okay to start social sciences and philosophy at whatever age you have. So this was also an opportunity.
I mean, one of the reasons I asked this question was it really does seem that, in STS, in science, technology, public policy, in development studies, in economics, the number of people who sort of switch from sciences or engineering is quite high. And one of the usual reasons is that they are dissatisfied. They see the big picture questions quite elusive when they study their specializations in science and engineering. And I find that a lot of the time where I'm actually advising people about their careers, many of them are switching because they're deeply dissatisfied. Now, I wanted to ask you, therefore, when you transitioned from engineering, you've laid out why the social sciences was much richer, but you took with you also very deliberate insights about the innovation process itself. and your familiarity with the labs, the process of engineering, the way in which firms work, and so on. Tell us a little bit about that. Your background did help you.
Yes, I think that, if I may say that, sometimes social sciences are a bit messy. What I have learned in my mathematics, physics, engineering studies is that if you are sure, you need to demonstrate. And if you are not sure, you should say you have a conjecture, but you shouldn't say that you are sure when you are not. This is not allowed in engineering. And it was very useful for me in social sciences. Most of my work is tentative. Most of my work is saying, I think the reasons I have to support my intuitions are these, but okay. So, and the other issue is that, of course, building empirical support was important. And this is, I learned a lot from Jorge Katz's work. Jorge Katz is one of the economists that, if I am not mistaken, Jorge went down to the shop floor in the factories and talk with engineers and try to understand how they think and how they feel. Feeling is very important. And Chris Freeman said, I have said that so many times when Freeman wrote, when you decide if you have to buy or you have to do yourself, one of the considerations you have to take into account is the honor of our scientists and engineers. Order is important. Feeling is important. Giving people the opportunity to develop their talents is important. An opportunity that is systematically denied in the global South. So this was something that I bring with me, the frustration of people not being allowed to deploy their capabilities. And this is something that very early, when I start working on innovation surveys at firm level, the issue of not only asking what you do, how much you spend, but the more important issue of how do you learn and what are the opportunities you have to learn. And to learn means that I need to know what people know in the firm. And this is a question that is hidden because it's not in the Oslo manual, it's not in the Frascati manual. It's in the Canberra manual, a manual that has never been applied in Latin America. So the issue of learning started there. And the conviction that, as Veronica was so kind to remind, led us many years ago to the idea of the learning divides, because learning means being able to and have the opportunity to apply the two things. There are two legs to learning, and this started there with the surveys that, for the first time, as far as I know, introduced in innovation surveys the question, tell me, what do people know in the firm? Not only how many professionals do you have, tell me what they know. Because it's not the same to have a chemist or to have a chemical engineer. It's absolutely different. And so this was something that, well, has to do with my background. And okay.
So just building on that, you know, we all come from different disciplines and sometimes multiple disciplines. And in economics, for example, as you pointed out, in some fields, subfields of economics, there is a real lack of capability or interest or even methodology to describe learning. And of course, it was the great contributions of Jorge Katz and many others that actually focused on how firms were learning, but also the kinds of things they could not administer within the scope of the administrative boundaries of the firm, which explains the relationship, say, between microeconomics and more macroeconomic uncertainties. So even in economics, there's always been this language where you could take on issues that were difficult to describe with the precision of a false precision, but were really critical to learning. Issues such as the boundaries of the firm, what kinds of resources exist and do you recognize those resources? What kinds of non-market institutional environments do you need to use to your advantage? And you and I, in our work, we collapse that a little bit in discussing innovation under scarcity conditions. And you described 3 to 4 years of exchanges. And I remember, I still have a lot of the emails and a lot of the notes where we were trying to just describe the language about how we would write out this little 2x2. So the question I want to ask you is, what is it in the sphere of development studies around this learning divide? Where do you think we have made advances? What do you think is still lacking? Is it because we're not thinking as disciplinarians, we're thinking too much from our disciplines, we're unable to talk across discussions of learning? What's your sense of where we're at now? There's a learning divide, and then there's the field of development studies more broadly, where we're all apart. Where are we at? What crossroads are we at?
You are really the queen of making complicated questions, Smita. This was always your mark. I think that, I don't know what I think about this, it's too complex, but I think that we have made some progress. You know, let me tell you an anecdote. You know that Richard Nelson made a group, and the group was named the Catch-Up Group. And he was incredibly kind, and he invited me to join that group. In Globalix 2008 in Mexico, beautifully organized by Gabriela Dutrenit, I discussed with my good friend, I call him Professor Nelson, and he looked at me very, very grumpy and say, I am Dick. Okay. And I tell him, please don't call this group the catch-up group. Call the group the development group. And he was so kind. And he called the group the development group, but it was a failure, a total failure. You know why? Because since then on, the group started to be called the ex-catch-up group. What do I mean by that? Development as catch-up was so strong. I have a fight. I am not going to say with whom, but I can tell you it was a very, very high ranked European scholar. And we shout at each other. Development is catch-up, development is not catch-up. Well, I think that today, development is not catch-up, for sure, for good, because you think that we need to catch up with whom? You tell me. One thing is in the sectoral system of innovation framework to talk about catch up of one industry in one country with the industry in another country. This is one thing. But development, catch up in development with whom? With the United States? Do you want to catch up with the United States? Really? Tell me. This is our future. Or with whom? I love the Scandinavian Northern Social Democrats, nowadays all Social Democrats, all women prime ministers. I love them. But what are we talking about? How could we? So this is one part of my answer. I think that we have developed a new way of looking into development that put catch up to a side. On the other side, we are working much more together, people from innovation studies and people from development studies. It's not as strong as we need to. And I think the difference is about the kind of knowledge we are talking about. People from development studies are very, very, they do not trust modern knowledge. And this is a problem. We need to transform Western modern knowledge to our advantage. We cannot throw away the baby with the bathwater. And this is one difference that we need to bridge. Without modern, and I have to say, it's Western. What can I say? I would love not, but it is Western. Okay. We are talking English, are we? I would much prefer to talk in Spanish, but we are talking English. And it's not to say that this is a challenge, a big challenge, to change the directionality. And I think that we are starting working in the very complex issue of knowledge directionality. And I think that this is a good road ahead for us as innovation scholars to work together with people from development that look into the problem from another perspective, and we need to build more points in common. So we are living in very, very troubled times. It's not only climate change, it's also rising inequality, and it's also rising authoritarianism and the weakening of democracy. We are living in a very, very complicated world. I guess that many of you have paid attention to the Shoshana Zuboff book, Surveillance Capitalism. The idea that all this wonderful revolution of the ICTs is being a strong tool in the hands of those that are killing freedom. And this is very, very, very damaging. And so I think that we have to think in development in terms of the old challenges and the new challenges. And I think that this is a good road ahead for us to keep on working as innovation scholars, because we have a huge responsibility, because innovation is behind all what we are talking about. So, well, I am not sure if I have answered your question, but
no, I mean, one response is, of course, that, you know, for many in the development sphere, we after all are not, unlike other development scholars. Innovation scholars tend not to be anti-science, anti-quote-unquote modern science, but we are slightly more, I would say, attuned to different ways in which knowledge is produced, and different organizations or environments in which certain kinds of knowledge are taken forward. But that's to a subset of an audience where we're all talking to each other and we kind of understand that these issues are important. This is not the way, however, that science and engineers are taught. And while we all go back and forth, and many of us, we advise, we work with science ministries, we work with engineering colleagues, we work in teams, the reality is that this is not traditional education. So I want to really kind of tease out one or two issues in your answer. As an educator, and also somebody who has been so highly recognized in university scholarship, in university leadership, you are playing a role not only as an innovation scholar, you are trying to imagine the education of the future. What is it that you think, if you were an engineer coming into the system now, what would you like to see young development scholars doing? How would you like to see these communities interacting?
Well, for these two communities to interact, we need to build a common language. And I think that one way of giving the opportunity to build this language and to get people into contact is through teaching. Teaching science, technology, and society, or science, technology, society, and development in all careers, university careers. People used to study these kind of things as professionals, as postgraduate studies. I am not against, but what I love is to teach to pre-graduates, to young, very young. Take them at 20. You cannot teach a future medical doctor as you teach an agronomical science, and as you teach a philosopher, or as you teach an economist. But there is a common body of knowledge they have to have. And then my dream is to have the possibility of building a common body of notions, of concepts, of problems, of challenges for all, based on the social responsibility that everyone that have the privilege of getting knowledge have to the rest of society, and then build with other people the kind of specific questions, because how looks the problem of science, technology, and society for an economist, and how looks the problem of science, technology, and society for a chemist? It's not the same. They have different kind of problems, different kind of ethical dilemmas. And all this would be, imagine a forum of university students of all kind of disciplines discussing these kind of things, and discussing how can they engage. This notion of engaged university is so near to developmental university, because what we need to do is to believe, I believe, that there is a lot of solidarity there, and solidarity need to be called, because if you let this solidarity alone, individualism is going to win. Universities and those that in universities are pushing for changes need to just think how to call in solidarity from students and from faculty. I have a little bit of experience on that. It's not easy, absolutely not easy, but it's possible. And this is something that can be done. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things that drew us together was precisely because we had done a lot of problem solving in labs, but we had also seen the advantages of team teaching, team problem solving together, and so on. So we could imagine the relationship between somebody whose cognitive process is framing a problem, and then the kind of discursive relationship they need to have with the problem, with the community in which they are, the community both as users, but also as innovators themselves, and so on. So we could see it in very real terms. Sometimes I worry that a certain amount of innovation scholarship has extracted all of these insights and made it very abstract. It's taken it away from the context in which we, found each other. And so tell us a little bit about the developmental university. This is a very powerful concept. You've contributed enormously in this strand of literature, but also that development universities were part of the fabric of society in which you saw innovation policies as social policies, right? So these two bodies of work for you were quite closely related. So could you lead us through this?
Well, the issue of developmental university started with a discussion we have with Kalestu Juma, late Kalestu Juma, a great scholar, a very good friend. And we were discussing how to frame the issue. And I didn't like entrepreneurial university. I am a good friend of Lersdorf and Henry Epkovich, but really the entrepreneurial university didn't say anything. And so one day, Kalestus said, okay, you don't want that. So you give me an alternative. What about developmental university? I didn't know at the time that the developmental university is a book. It's a book referring to African universities. I didn't know that. I'm sorry. The idea of a developmental university is basically how do you conduct part of the work of the university towards contributing to development. It's not to say that everything has to do with that. Of course, people need to study basic science and basic science in all the disciplines. You need to know the basics of sociology. You need to study Durkheim and Weber and Veblen and whatever you want. And we are not talking about transforming everything in something geared towards development. What we need is to make room for something else. And this else is a commitment to development. And this is very complicated because being a scholar is each time more difficult. And young people know that, and the anguish of investing years and years of your life studying to become a scholar, and then you need to publish and publish and publish, and then you don't get a permanent job. And this, well, the literature is simply overwhelming about the situation of young. And what are you talking about? Talking about development, talking about the need to talk to people that don't use the language of science and try them to understand me and me to understand them. And this takes too much time. I need to publish to be a scholar. So it's a very complicated issue. It's not just, I am going to give a course on development. I am going to ask people to be nice. No, you need to build the structural conditions to allow people to transform the university into a developmental university. It is a change. You know, in 1918, in Córdoba, Argentina, the students of medicine started a revolutionary movement that is until today in our imaginary in Latin America. And in the manifesto, they wrote, in the future, there will be professors in the Republic of the University, only the constructors, the builders of truth, beauty, and good. To build good can be seen as a mission of the developmental university. Of course, good is such a complicated concept, but I think that if you make room for people to be able to devote time from the knowledge they have for development goals, which is not the case in universities in general, then you are building developmental universities. And this is modest, but important.
So one, I mean, to take us to slightly more controversial ground, one of the questions, I mean, that brought us together was whether or not there was a common way of thinking across countries around innovation. And certainly the ability to innovate under scarcity conditions was something that we provided a language for, that was a way to describe what we had seen. But when we talk about the structural conditions, when we talk about the different kinds of economies, the social life in which people navigate their world of products, different kinds of processes, different kinds of organizations, suddenly the complexity of social life in our different countries looks very real. And I myself, and as you know, you have also differed in the use of the phrase the global south. I am increasingly of the view that it hides more than it reveals. It's not very helpful for scholarship. And it presumes a lot of solidarities that we may not necessarily have. So one of the questions, and I think a challenge for development, is that a lot of the words that we now use, global south, social justice, inequality even, have come to be seen across different kinds of scholarship within the development platform as not really very critically speaking to each other. We're all aligned in the same direction, but we're not actually using these words in the same way. And this seems to be quite important because when we began our conversation, we, way back when, we had been discussing very specific things. The design, for example, of neonatal incubators, the availability of potable water, the ability to think about ownership of seeds, right? Now, these have all kind of gone off into different terrains, if you like, in development scholarship. And I wondered whether you would like to say something that pulls it back together, because it's very tempting sometimes, I think, for scholars to see these as this goes into STS, this goes into economics, this goes into investment, this goes into something else. How do you see the innovation language pulling us back together?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that we have an opportunity to look for holiness now after the pandemic, because what the pandemic shows, it's true in Uruguay. I have learned a lot from Veronica's work in Argentina. To innovate in scarcity condition save us. It's just that we cannot buy absolutely anything in the market. The hoarding, for me, you don't have anything. And we were able to do it instead of everything. Why? What are the lessons from the pandemic? How could we come together, governments, engineers, scientists, people in my country? Scientists are asked to have a beer when they saw their faces because they recognized them, because they went into the television to tell people how to behave. This is a unique situation. It will not last, and we are going to lose our opportunity. I am sorry to be so pessimistic, but beside what I can, but it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to understand a very unique situation and to learn the lessons. And to learn these lessons, we need to really know something about political science. And we need to know a little bit about social psychology. We need to know much more than we know. And perhaps it's a very, very old teaching lesson that it's better to learn through problems than to learn through disciplines. Perhaps the pandemic gives us a problem, a real problem, and through the understanding of the problem, of the promises it has for the future, we can come together as we need in a true interdisciplinary way, not trying to be Leonardo da Vinci. I am an economist and I know everything else, or I am a sociologist and I know everything. Well, no, we don't know everything else. We know a little bit of what we know, and the other know a little bit of what they know, and come together through a problem. I think that this could be, and this could be something for In Conversation. This is something for GlobalX. This is something for for young people. I have always the same feeling. You know, you think, what was the time in your life in which you invest more in your mind and in your heart? Your PhD. In your PhD, you were, and people are absolutely scattered. We should come together. We should propose common problems. So different people in different parts of the world took a common problem and studied in their different realities and come together to a forum and discuss conclusions so we can build upon them. Because I think that the worst enemy of what you are asking for is fragmentation. We need to get much more united. And there are strategies that we can put forward to get there.
I mean, just a point on this. I'm conscious of time as well. I mean, one issue that concerns me is I feel like, you know, in many of the settings in which I work, there really is a kind of a hierarchy, and it's not economists, it's scientists, right? So people in other fields have, of course, critiqued the Republic of Science. They've discussed how the governance of scientific problems, or even what is science, have ended up narrowing the scope of what most folks across the world need to broaden. That is, many things have scientific questions embedded in them, but they are problems first and foremost, the point that you are making as well. That is, we're not tied to our disciplines. You know, I like to say that we are a different kind of phenomenologist. We look at a specific problem, then we abstract back and we think about what is useful knowledge to bring to this problem or not. How do we frame this? Now, this is not something that is traditionally taught. You would be lucky in university in most disciplines to be taught this. You usually learn it on the job.
Yes.
And so many people have described this process, but it feels a little bit to me, and it would be very nice to open this up to more questions on this, whether the community of development scholars and innovation scholars see communication to scientists and engineers as a critical part of what they do. A focal point, not simply we work in teams, we all hold hands, we feel good together, but that we actively communicate what innovation scholarship is about. I feel there's something lost in translation. Is that your sense, or do you feel like we're making headway?
Yes, I couldn't be more, I couldn't agree more with you. I have this feeling that, you know, engineers and scientists are responsible in last resort of innovation, of what we use, what we have and what we don't have. And that's what we don't have is even much more important, because the population of the world have not in terms of solution of their problems. So this kind of coming together, talking together, giving them, if you give them the opportunity to understand the power they have to do different things, and you give the opportunity concrete of doing things, and this is something that has to do what Veronica talked about, innovation policies as social policies. But for that, you need social policies that understand that innovation is a tool for social policies. And this is what exactly doesn't happen. Social policies need more money. No, they need more money, but they need more innovation. They need different innovation. I remember, Smita, when we discussed how were we going to call our innovation in scarcity condition, I proposed deviant innovation, and you say it was perhaps too strong. And then you proposed heterodox innovation. And we were discussing how to call this different thing, deviant, heterodox, whatever you want, but it's absolutely different. And social policy don't understand that they need these different innovations. And if they don't understand, how can we call engineers and scientists to do differently? People do what they are asked to do. People follow incentives. How do you want them to change if we don't give them the opportunity to change? And this is one of our challenges as innovation scholars, that as all scholars, in a sense, want to make some change in politics, not only in policies, of course in policies, but also in politics. So I think that we innovation scholars have a huge responsibility.
Thank you for that. Veronica, how are we doing on time? Shall we call it time?
I don't know if you have another question that you want to post before stopping, or we just go to the break. I don't know.
I have a quick question, which is, okay. Judith and I began our conversation many, many years ago by discussing the West versus the North. And, you know, we can discuss whether it's the North Atlantic, whether it's something else. But one difference, you know, particularly coming out of debates in India, but also other places, is that there really is an understanding that not only English, but real gridlocks in curriculum, in what is taught, who is cited, the importance of particularly US, UK, Western European, Greek, you know, where do we stop, right? So the trajectory for Latin American scholarship, which is very diverse, is of course very different from what has happened in Asia. And we would be naive to presume that that has been the same path, neither within the continents nor across the continents. So could you say a little bit more about this? Because one area I feel like innovation scholars can contribute is extremely rich cases that go back to citations within their own countries much more systematically, not having a conversation that always goes to Europe or to North America, cites them all in a grand trajectory of scholarship and then comes back. This does worry me because the problem solving is in context.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of this?
Well, I think you are absolutely right. And the richness of cases in our countries is enormous. But the problem is, in which theoretical framework do you put these cases? And sometimes I feel that people make huge work, 100 interviews, wonderful work, and then they try to put it into the framework of the concept that we received from the North. And I am not saying that what we receive from the North is not good. It's excellent. I simply say it's not enough. I am not trying to say, oh, get rid from the North. Absolutely not. But you have to translate. You have to translate. Sometimes there are concepts that are, in a sense, universal. I remember when Bent-Åke Lundvall, when he was a directorate in the OECD in Paris, I sent it a small paper on the electronic industry in Uruguay, and he answered to me, I don't have time to read your paper, but perhaps this could be useful for you. And he sent me his 1918 work of Aalborg University on user-producer interaction. User-producer interaction was, I know that from Jorge, but the way it was, the example, this is one thing, and the other was innovation that do not solve the problems of the people because of different kind of power relation or whatever. So there are concepts there. A national system of innovation, even if we think it is an ex-ante concept in our countries, is a very useful organizer of our thought, but it's not enough. So as a very, very great Latin American political scientist, Guillermo O'Donnell used to say, we need to make data and theory both. And I think that we in the South have made much more data. Sometimes I think so, that the theory that allow us to put our data in the right framework. But, and this is complicated for the young scholars. It's difficult for them. So, yeah.
Thanks, Judith. That was a great response. And I always count on you not to be diplomatic, because I am not either. So this is time to chug a few teas or coffees. Is that right, Veronica? Is this everyone's
Yes,
time?
yes. Just let me give some announce before. I just want to thank you both, because it was very delighted to hear you. I will keep hearing you two conversate forever. It's very interesting. Smita is so intelligent. She put so very interesting question, and Judith answers. She gave all that she is, and I like it a lot. So let me show you the next in conversation event that it's going to be on May on 7th. I'm sorry, I can't remember how to use this number. I'm sorry, but you can see it. Is in May, and it will be between Sean Besant and Howard Rush. So I hope find you all here in 17th of May. Okay, just for a few break, 5 minutes, and then we will be back with the panel's questions.
We have some great questions as well. So I'm just catching up with.
Yes. Do you need to send me? Do you need that I can send it for you? I collect them all if you.
I have the document open.
Okay.
So I think I see them, but
Okay.
we begin with Jorge, right?
Yeah.
So
Are we in the coffee with everybody else? Or just ourselves?
I'm sorry, Judith, I didn't understand you.
We are the four of us, or we are sharing with the audience?
We will share with the audience
But now in the coffee.
No, after 5 minutes, so people is able to go to the bathroom or pick up coffee or whatever, okay. And in 5 minutes we'll be back. If you want to shut down your camera for 5 minutes, okay, or whatever you want, and you can stay here and talking with us.
Okay, lo que te preguntaba es si somos solo nosotros o están todos los demás también.
Sí, están. Okay. Van a abrir el panel para ellos y para las preguntas de la audiencia también.
Muy bien. Sorry for the Spanish.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes when I want to be sure of something, I prefer to come to the mother tongue.
Vero, ¿cuánto tiempo tomo para mi intervención?
Tómate 10 minutos, Jorge, lo que necesites. Vos empezás.
Okay.
Jorge, es mucho mejor escucharte a vos, así que no tengas problema.
No es por eso.
No,
pero
te lo digo en serio, te lo digo tú.
No quiero monopolizar el tiempo, Judith. Pero no, de acuerdo, estoy de acuerdo. 10, 15 minutos está muy bien.
Never be sorry for your mother tongue, say Rosy. Thank you for understand us. all of us Latin American people that just want to speak in Spanish all the time.
In any case, we were just discussing how much time should Jorge take, and I tell him, take every time you want. Jorge, very gentlemanly, said, no, I wouldn't want to monopolize time. This is not the only thing we were talking about, so nothing too secret.
Okay.
I'm always reminded of how gracious everyone is to speak in different languages. You know, as I get older, I listen to podcasts in a lot of Indian languages, and I find after a while I can't remember the English word for something. So you know, it's also going back and forth.
So I think we can back. So Smita, I would ask you if you want to administrate the word in this part of the panel, if you are agree.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to.
Okay.
So we have the great pleasure of listening and delving a little bit into Judith's mind. We're all familiar with her excellent scholarship. And this is really a chance to have an open-ended discussion across the second half. And I hope you will all stay with us to ask these questions. I'd like to invite Jorge Katz, our very eminent scholar here, who is not only been so influential for so many of us as we thought about the issue of innovation, but he has his own academic and scholarly relationship with Judith. So this is a chance really to also hear them speak about some of the issues in common. So Jorge, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Smita. Let me begin by thanking you, Smita and Judith. It has been a wonderful occasion to hear you both and to share on your particular emotions and feelings as to where we are heading as a community, as an intellectual community. It's very deep, it's very honest, and I felt really quite happy to share with you very many things. You started, Smita, by talking about the discipline, what a discipline is. And Judith immediately said, I come from engineering. You said, I come from physics and mathematics. I have to tell you, I come from economics. And it's going to be really very tough to move into developing this kind of common language that will somehow bring us together into exploring a common ground between economics, engineering, and physics. But I would like to say that as from the point of view of economics, my feeling is that economics has been, ever since Keynes and Schumpeter in the 30s, developing along two different lines of thinking, which make it very difficult to arrive to the kind of common ground you were searching for in your conversation a minute ago. Keynes didn't have a word of microeconomics. Keynes started by saying what later on Higgs interpreted very briefly into ISLM as an equilibrium macro model, which shaped much of what the profession developed its thinking along in the 50s, 60s, and even today. If you go into much of our universities today in the South, economics is being taught today as a post-Keynesian developing of perfect foresight, Walrasian equilibrium, and rational thinking in economics. And it's interesting because at the end of the conversation, Judith talked about the young scholars. It's important to understand that these people need to develop their own living in a profession which is very much influenced by the way the market for economists operates these days. I mean, they won't have a valuable insertion in the market for economics if they don't follow these traditional ways of moving into macro analysis, which all today permeates into most of our schools of economics in the South. And unfortunately, this micro to macro thinking that I share with you is all about thinking how learning takes place and learning develops in society. It's not really it's not really being taught in our faculties. I mean, if you happen to move into my own faculty of economics at Chile, Schumpeter is not ever mentioned. I mean, Keynes is all the time in the classroom, but Schumpeter is not being mentioned at all. I mean, this idea that the micro to macro creative destruction process changes the structure, and that this is all built on the basis of learning at the micro level, which is not Keynes, is Schumpeter, is absent completely of our teaching. And I can assure you that I walk into my class in the University of Chile, and I feel myself as a lonely wolf trying to teach these kids that there is another way of looking into economics, but the traditional macro to micro way in which Keynesian models operate. And unfortunately, the point is that all these kids are looking forward to go for specialization to Yale, MIT, Harvard, or Stanford. And they come back to Latin America with this preconception that economics is macroeconomics, and that equilibrium is the very basic idea on which they have to work, and that the notion of structural change and micro to macro building up, learning and changing in structure is completely outside of their imaging. I mean, it's completely foreign, alien to their way of looking at what economics is all about. So my very first reflection on hearing you, which I share completely in your perspective of the world, is to tell you that unfortunately, the discipline, as I know the discipline after 50 years of teaching economics, is not moving in the direction you are thinking about. It's moving exactly in the other way, in the other direction. It's moving into financial markets. It's moving into aspects in which people make a lot of money, and they have to resign this idea of exploring the micro transformation of the universe, because they simply have to go where the signs of wealth and possibilities, market possibilities operate. So in a way, I heard you speaking throughout your presentation, which I entirely share with you, with a feeling that unfortunately we seem to be moving in the opposite direction. And in a sense, Judith came out at the end when she said, I'm very pessimistic. Unfortunately, my feeling is that Judith came out with a similar perception that although we all feel that we need a common language with scientists, with engineers, and with chemists, this separation of disciplines is heading us in the wrong direction. And again, very much in the way Judith put it at the end of her presentation, we keep on citing authors from the North as this constitutes the way of preserving our intellectual preeminence. And there is very little citing of works in the South, which is very, very substantial and very informative. And I share with Veronica this idea that a lot is going on in southern countries in terms of building up knowledge and understanding of how the structure operates and it transforms itself through time. Judith at some point brought up the idea of how the pandemic is going to change this. And again, here, she was a little skeptical in the sense of saying, I'm afraid eventually we are going to go back into the old path, that all this feeling of commonality and of sharing is going to move away as the financial sector of the economy keeps on accumulating this fantastic break in the distribution of wealth to which we are sort of assisting today. We are increasingly moving into societies in which the upper 5% of society accumulates 80 or 90% of the wealth of society, and that we live in a situation in which social exclusion is almost invisible. We are moving into modernity. We are moving into artificial intelligence, into digital processes, into biological economics, into robotics, etc., in the upper 10 or 15% of GDP, but at the cost of excluding the lower 20, 30, 40% of societies, in Argentina, almost 50% of society. And this is becoming almost invisible. I mean, we in a way, living in countries in which at the same time, we have a modern, small part of the society somehow dialoguing and getting in conversation with the modern part of the world, which is entering into artificial intelligence and digital processing, and a lower part of society which still is fighting for accessing clean water or housing. And in a way, economists just don't see that. Economists just keep on thinking of macro equilibrium and are in very different ways isolated from the idea that the structure is changing in the way of making the difference between the have and the have-nots ever growing in time. So even though I completely share the spirit of the conversation of Judith and Smita, I have to make a warning of saying, look, in a way, things are moving in the other way. Things are moving towards a discipline, economics, which is somehow showing the way into a more marginalized society, which is excluding a significant part of the population. Even though my own view of economics is bottom up, it's starting from learning at the individual firm level, and not only firm level. It's also public agencies. It's also many other institutions at the micro level, universities themselves, which are accumulating learning and capabilities. But there is this divorce between the macro and the micro, in which macro continues to be operated by people who are trained in Harvard, MIT, or Stanford, and come back to Latin America with this idea that fiscal equilibrium is, by the most, the important thing to be attained. And, you know, I mean, it's difficult to foresee what kind of a future and some countries in Latin America have this more clear. Uruguay is a very good example, Judith. Uruguay is doing much better, or Costa Rica is doing much better than what Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, or Ecuador are doing in this sort of micro to macro kind of dialogue. And unfortunately, we don't have an economics profession which really understands that all this is what's going on. Thank you very much for giving me this space, but I entirely agree with you, Judith, and with you, Smita, as to the right kind of values that should be guiding our discipline, which unfortunately, after 50 years of teaching economics, I have the feeling that it's not moving in this direction.
Judith, I have a quick intervention actually on this point, because I think it is really quite important. I mean, Jorge is pointing out correctly that, you know, Schumpeter, for example, is really not taught. But I would actually go in a slightly different direction and say that there are many other things that are overtaught. To give you an example, in economics curriculum, Jorge, I ended up doing the maths, physics, and economics and planning track. So one of the questions was, what would be a normal part of this disciplinary mix that would get us in the direction of innovation scholarship that was really honest? And one of the biggest pushbacks that I have found is actually not the financial economists, because you can argue that they are, in their own peculiar way, pragmatists of a type. The ones that I actually find it very difficult to move past are actually Marxian scholars who are convinced that the answer to all problems is class inequality. So they have no language. This is not a statement about Marxian thought. It's not even a statement about that you shouldn't teach it. On the contrary, the difficulty is that it's very hard to engage with a Schumpeterian model purely from a class basis. And this has become such a bottleneck in conversations about innovation, not because people aren't willing or even interested in the debate. They are extremely interested, but students in economics classes do not have that language to describe what all three of us are saying, which is that there is a way to describe the evolution and the dynamic of problem solving and innovation that occurs at the micro level, but in open-ended, unexpected, divergent trajectories that do not then neatly fall into the ISLM or other model, right? And I suspect a lot of microeconomists think that the ISLM is like black magic. It just came out of nowhere. Nobody knows where it came. Nobody really cares where it came from. It's completely unrelated with microeconomics, which is why so many scholars of innovation are focused on micro processes. So I wondered whether, Judith, you want to pick this issue up, not so much from the economics, but are we being slipshod about what we teach across the discipline? Should we force feed, for example, people, should they be confronted with Schumpeter? No matter what your discipline, you get smacked around and somebody says, today is Schumpeter, whether you like it or not, and we have to digest this. What do you think?
Smita, can I, before Judith comes
Yes,
in,
yes,
I will
please.
immediately let you in, Judith, but let me say one thing. It's natural resources. I mean, we are natural resource rich countries, and there is very little in Schumpeter that we will pick up concerning the functioning of natural resources. I mean, basically Schumpeter is a scholar doing bottom-up explanation of the changes in capitalism, but he regards natural resources as not very important from the technological point of view. And if you go into evolutionary economies today, all of them important friends of us, we have discussed this with Rich Nelson, with Giovanni Dossi, with Franco Malerba. They don't have an important feeling as to what the role of bottom-up technological change in natural resources is. And this is a very important area in which the South has to develop theoretical thinking, which we cannot expect to come from the North, but has to come from the South. I mean, Uruguay is doing a spectacular change in biological industries related to forestry or related to biotechnology. Well, it happens what Judith said, that she sent her papers to Bentoque. Bentoque is a marvelous person, but he doesn't have the time to read about Uruguay. And he doesn't care very much about Uruguay. He cares about Norway, about Sweden, about Switzerland, about Sweden. But what is happening in Tacuarembó in Uruguay is a major change which needs to be understood in terms of theoretical thinking.
Well, Judith, go ahead, please.
I have to start by, I want to say only three things very briefly. The first thing has to do with pessimism. Pessimism is a bad advisor. And I would like to remind you that a man that fought fascism in Italy, Antonio Gramsci, used to say, against all odds, pessimism of intelligence and optimism of will. And I think that this is the right way of putting it, because we need to be pessimists, because what is the use of deluding ourselves? But we shouldn't, as Jorge Katz has never done in his 50 years of teaching economics, leave things as they are. We need to go on and keep on looking for what we need to achieve. The second issue is that we need to look a bit more into the issue of niches. How do you call it? Nichos? Niches, okay? Not everything can be done as a whole, but you can build transformation from below. It is possible that anecdotes never will evolve toward trends, but you need to start from somewhere. And so this is important. In terms of economics, I remember an interview with Richard Nelson, where Richard Nelson said, once upon a time, when I was young, economic history, history of ideas, were not small sisters of macroeconomics when I study economics. Nowadays, everything has changed. And when the interviewer asked him, but why? He said, mathematics. There is a quantification that has become absurd. There is a wonderful book named Trust in Numbers that from a psychological point of view, try to explain why we put so much faith in which we shouldn't put faith. But the fact is that mathematics has done a lot of wrong. And I am very concerned how young scholars think that if they don't have a model, whatever stupid the model is, they don't have nothing. And this is very complicated. And we are not going to fight this in a direct way. I think the way of fighting this is showing that a different kind of approach is possible. And this is why I think that we should all together push towards opening a new window to look into the problems through science, technology, society, and development. Is much easier to have something new that try to change an orthodox course on economics. And I hope that through this new teaching way of looking into problems, students could start to be much more critical. And well, you know, the world is not going into a good direction. So we don't have the right to expect too much and to say, okay, if we cannot change things in 1 year, it is not worth. Of course it is. Of course it is. So this is what I would have to say.
I agree, Judith. I agree.
So I think what I'll do is I'll ask Carlota's question. Let me see if I can find it. It's here. It says, Judith, when I met you in Venezuela, you had designed and taught a science and society course for computer science students, and you were a very passionate advocate of an interdisciplinary education in all science and technology careers. That was quite an innovation in the 1970s. How do you see that need now, and how much do you think we have advanced in such interdisciplinarity? The second question she asks is, in your recent work with Rodrigo, you have criticized the evaluation system for teachers and researchers. Could you explain the changes you propose and why it's so important?
I would say that this was what Carlota is referring to. Yeah.
Judith, I will have to leave you soon. It has been beautiful to see you all, and I look forward to see you again. Thanks very much for everything I received this morning, and I hope to see you again soon.
All right, Jorge. Thanks so much.
Bye. Bye. I think that I love being a teacher. If I have to, you know, I am retired from the university, and I have given my course on science, technology, and society to my young colleagues. And my young colleague invited me once a year to give a class. Last week, I gave it on innovation. What is innovation? I enjoyed so much. So it's so nice not to teach, to seduce, because teaching is seducing, isn't it? So I never, in my so long career on teaching, this first course for computer scientists was young students. They have 18, 19. They didn't know where they come from. They didn't know the history of computing. They did only know about how to do algorithms. They were so fascinated to know where they came from. They came from engineering, they came from mathematics, they came from quantum mechanics. Were they? So opening up the discipline. It was absolutely fascinating, and I never had the opportunity to teach to engineers. I always teach to social scientists. But I keep on trying, huh? And I hope we will, because it's totally different. The kind of the critical thinking of both kind of young people are totally different, and it's so important. So yes, I think that we haven't do enough on that direction, but I hope perhaps we should write a book. We should write a book and translate it in several languages, and get the Africans in and tell us what should African students need to know, and let's put it into the book. And so what Latin American students need to know, and let's put it into the book. It would be a wonderful common project to write a book on that, because for students having, let's say, a handbook, just to have it would be such a nice idea. Not for postgraduate, that's important. But remember, very fresh people. So this is one answer. And the other issue, yes, I am absolutely convinced that absolutely nothing can be done if we don't change the hegemonic way of building academic prestige. We need a counter-hegemonic system of building academic prestige, because people move for incentive. I'm very sorry to be a vulgar Marxist. I am not, but that's true. That's true, because, you know, if you are a doctor, you have a title that say you are a doctor, you are an engineer, you are whatever. Being a scholar is not a title. Being a scholar is something that other people put on you, and you have to prove every day of your life that you are a scholar through the incentives that scholarship asks for. Things are changing. Things are changing. It's very difficult, but the Declaration of Research Assessment has been signed by more than 1,000 institutions in the world. And now in England, in the Netherlands, in Ireland, and I don't remember a fourth country, they are shaping differently the way you tell other people what you are. That is called the narrative CV. People are, the problem is that many people agree that the present prevailing research evaluation is bad, but we don't have good alternatives. Building alternatives, operational alternatives, not just how nice would be that everybody read everybody. No, this is not possible. We need to go against numbers. We need to go to qualitative issues, but qualitative issues take a lot of time. So it's not so easy. But if we do not change the way we reward people for the scholar work they do, we are not going to change anything. In academia, in development, in politics, because we are pushing for individualistic, purely individualistic way of behaving. So I think that this is absolutely strategic. And I am aware that it is extremely difficult because it touches the way we look into ourselves. And this is always very complicated. But this is a battle we need to fight.
I mean, it's, you know, if I could say, it's quite a utopian view of the university for the same reasons that you've described. I mean, across disciplines, there's been so much internecine warfare going on campuses between academics within, say, not just within disciplines, but within professional areas of inquiry. So I am actually more pessimistic about the university than I am about development. But on that more optimistic note, we have Andrew. Andrew has a couple of questions, so go for it, Andrew.
Yeah, I like to be cautiously optimistic. I'd first like to thank you for a very engaging discussion, and thank you, Judith, along with Rodrigo, have been very inspiring to me, especially like your early work on interactive learning spaces and the idea of a mix of gardening policies for what I was seeing following Johann Schatz's early ideas as niches and looking at innovation in El Salvador in rural areas. And a lot of that learning happened within this sustainable development for Central America project, where you and Rodrigo were our mentors over 10, even 15 years. The first question I had was, thinking back, you taught us a lot. I learned a lot from you both. What did you learn from this immersion in sort of this Central American reality, small countries, but even further on the periphery than where you were in Uruguay? Can you think back to some significant learnings from that experience? And then your leadership in GlobalX is the first president from the Global South, and the former presidents from the Global South, and also your leadership in LALIX have been really important. How important is that, being part of the LALIX learning community, that community of practice? Can you think about any specifics that really you say their LALIX was really important to me? How LALIX worked for you as this kind of interactive learning space and helped you go forward? Those are my two questions.
Very precise. I have learned a lot about what the thinking in different Latin Americans, and not only Latin Americans in the South. I have to say that Costa Rica has a leadership in thinking about sustainable innovation system. Innovation system is an umbrella. What means sustainable innovation system? What means inclusive innovation system? That make us think about some kind of characteristic of features that are not taken into account in the general framework, but are very important in the description of reality and also in the description of the future ahead. So this is important. And also I have to say that there are a lot of Southern literature that reflect theoretically on what is going on in their realities, from where I have learned immensely. So this is, I have no time here to go in detail in the literature, but I could do that. And I try all the time to read young scholars from the rest of the world. I am learning a lot. I remember teaching in the GlobalX Academy and finding, again, in different settings, exactly what I have found in Latin America. And this is very reassuring, because you know then that it's not just, let's say, something exotic. You recognize that this is something structural. So yes, we need to read us between us much more, I think. And I say that as something that goes not for you, but for me as well. And as for GlobalX and particularly LALIX, yes, LALIX is a community of practice. And AfricaLix is also a community of practice. And I think that IndiaLix and ChicaLix, and I hope EuroLix would be that, because we have in common some important issues that make easy to talk to each other, because we share some common words, some common concepts, some ways of applying this concept to our reality. And I think also that we share some hopes, and this is not trivial. So yes. Thank you for your question. Very precise and very nice.
Thanks, Andrew. Those were actually really good questions because they, it's easy to talk across countries as if they have great commonalities, but they really are distinct trajectories, opportunities for not only the Central American economies that are usually just bundled in with everyone else. So I really appreciate the question. We have some time for questions, and I wondered whether, Veronica, you'd like to just ask a few people, or I can do that. Both are fine. Shall I just go ahead and read out some questions, or pick on a couple of people and ask them to unmute and maybe ask their question directly? That would be better.
Yeah. Ask them unmute and.
Okay, I'm going to ask Theo. Theo Papiano is here. You have two questions, which is a bit cheeky, but they are both really great. So I wondered whether you could ask them both in turn.
Thank you, Smita, and thanks so much for this event. It's wonderful to see you all and hear you. I'm not quite sure. I have two questions. Basically, I just made a comment initially about development scholars, because it seemed to me that some development scholars keep being rather suspicious of innovation scholars, accusing them of being rather uncritical of the impact of new technologies on development, and feeling that they don't have that much critical grasp of the direction of innovations. And I made the comment that this is actually rather unfair, because in my readings, not only from this community, but other communities of innovation scholars, I see increasingly critical pieces of work thinking about the direction of innovation, thinking about the impact of innovation on development. I don't know whether you share the same feeling, but I just think that somehow this perception should change, and perhaps we should do more to change this perception. So that was my main comment, right? I don't know what kind of second question. I mean, I don't remember I made the second question.
But basically, just to paraphrase, this is really about the perceived difference between development scholars and innovation scholars, and perhaps building some bridges between the two, right? Yeah. Judith?
Well, I think that the divorce between development scholars and innovation scholars is a tragedy, intellectually speaking. You have at one extreme those that call that development is not a concept, that is a Western concept, that is an imperialistic concept, that is simply, we need to go to post-colonial studies and reject development as a concept. This is one extreme. And you have the other extreme. Development is catching up, don't bother anymore with that. We need to catch up with the North, and this is the way. Of course, within these two extremes that are real, I am not making a caricature. This is really so. I am deeply concerned. I am not concerned about the catching up. The catching up, of course, but the other ones, yes, I am concerned by people that think that there is no hope, but rejecting the whole concept of development because it is biased for the West or for the North or whatever. This is not so. It comes with saying for knowledge and development implies that we need to talk in the same language, but this is not possible. This is not possible. We have to be realistic. The language of modern science is not a common language. This is a reason not to use it. But how could we use it in another directionality? I know that people now in developing studies are working a lot on directionality, and this is very important. But I feel that what Theo said is true. We don't trust each other. We don't really we don't trust each other. You know, for that, nothing better than a good fight. Let's get together and let's fight. In a good way. But we need to come together, because if not, we will not fertilize each field in the way it is needed for those in innovation studies that worry for development as our first concern. So yes, I really thanks Theo for putting this forward, because it is it's not only very important, it is possible to change. This is something that is possible to change. We can work on that. I am now working with a lot of young scholars in a project with extremely, how I say it, pompous name of Science, Technology and Innovation for a New Development. We are thinking on that. And we need anthropologists that in principle reject the notion of development that many innovation scholars have. Let's talk together. Let's come together and discuss, and we will find common fields of understanding. I am absolutely sure of that.
So I have a last question from Birendra, if he's here. Birendra?
Yes, this is Smita. Thank you, Judith and Smita, for this wonderful conversation. And as a young scholar, I was listening both of you with a great hope and admiration. But at the same time, I was also having some concern, because in your conversation, you used the word resource constraint, environment, scarcity few times. And I come from India, and I was thinking like, and global south is not a small, a small geographical location. So there are multiple global south in global south. Though I don't want to put this binary of global north and south opposite to each other. So I was thinking like, and I was also recently reading a paper where they said that in some context, resource scarcity could be socially constructed, where some communities are structurally, perpetually denied to access certain resources, technology, knowledge. So do you think this kind of discussion, when we talk about current innovation scholarship, this kind of nuanced discussion about what is resource scarcity and which kind of uncertainty, which kind of implications it's having for different sections of the society, is part of current innovation scholarship?
Thank you for your question. It's a very, very complex and important question. I hope nobody could think that praising the capacity to innovate in scarcity condition is a way of saying how lucky we are that we are so poor. Of course, this is absolutely not the idea. You understand my point. But the only thing I say is, being able to solve problems in scarcity condition is first, absolutely mandatory, because if not, problems are not going to be solved. And second, it can be a huge strength, particularly nowadays. Albert Hirschman, the great theory and action man of development, in his book of 1958, Economics of the Strategy of Economic Development, he used to say, development is not so much of making perfect distribution of assets, but of finding strengths that are hidden, fragmented, scattered, and put that strengths to work for development. And one of such strengths is the capacity to solve problems in scarcity condition, the capacity that Annie Gupta all over India documented in a marvelous way, and the way that is not documented, but it should, of problem solving through the mass frontier science and technology in a different way. You can use physics differently, you can use mathematics differently, you can use computers differently, you can use chemistry differently. It's not, there is never, ever, you don't have one solution for a problem. You have many possible solutions. The solution that you have is one. The solution you can make is another one, even with the same scientific and technological principles. And this is what I'm talking about. We and Smita, we are talking about when we talk about the capacity to solve problems in scarcity conditions. It is just a strength that has been invisibilized, that we have despised ourselves. We say, no, this is not the good way of doing things. The good way of doing things is the way they do it. No, the good way of doing things is the way we do it. And this confidence in ourselves is one of the main assets of development.
I think Virendra's point also reminds us that one of the things we took on in that paper, Judith, was really this question of self-confidence, that these relationships within these countries, within these societies, are things that have really been wiped out. I mean, you can say we're pushing back against, colonizing, decolonizing, all of that, but one of those things that was wiped out was this confidence. And even in societies that were not colonized, these complex layers of Western or other Northern debates have really created this underwhelming response, which I think needs to be scrutinized a little bit more. So thank you all the audience for this wonderful chance to engage. I really want to thank the organizers, and Judith, really such an honor to be able to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, all of you. It was absolutely wonderful. It was a joy, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I do. And
Thank you both. It was great to have you here. It was very insightful, very interesting to hear you. I enjoyed very much. I think all the audience will agree with me. And a huge hug for you from distance. Thank you very much. And just remember that a reminder that our following event will be on 17th of May. So please keep in touch, and I hope you see you again in the next In Conversation series. Thank you, Rajesh, very much for organizing and be behind all of these events. See you. I don't know if you want to turn on your cameras so we can take a picture of you if you are there, please. Okay, I have a lot of people with the cameras on, so. Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
So great. Love this.
Thank you all so much.
I love it very much. Yeah.
And Veronica, a request, please, to just keep the chat with you. So a lot of people have responded with a lot of comments, and I've really not had a chance to look at them. And I would love to engage and respond back. So
yes,
thank you all so much.
Visit the